The woods at night had a sound all their own. Branches snapping, leaves hissing, the distant bark of something unseen. But Amara Bennett heard none of it. All she heard was the blood thundering in her ears and her own ragged breathing as she ran. She ran hard. She ran like her life depended on it, because it did. Her white dress, the one her mother had pressed that morning with trembling hands, was torn at the hem now, snagged on a fence she'd vaulted without slowing. One shoe was gone, lost somewhere back in the dark. She clutched a small canvas bag against her chest, her knuckles white, her arms pumping. Behind her, crashing through the same undergrowth she'd just passed, she could hear her younger brother Eli keeping pace. "Keep going," Eli hissed, his voice barely above the wind. "Don't stop, Amara. Don't you dare stop." She didn't. Not until the tree line broke open onto the old logging road and she saw them, headlights, cutting white and merciless through the darkness. A truck, moving fast, moving toward her. Amara skidded to a stop on the gravel. Her chest heaved. Her eyes locked on the truck as it screeched to a halt not 10 feet away, and the driver's door flew open before the engine even went quiet. Victor Bennett stepped out. He was a tall man, her father. Tall the way old pines were tall, rigid, deeply rooted, almost impossible to move. He stood in the wash of his own headlights and looked at his daughter the way a warden looks at an escaped prisoner. His jaw was set. His eyes were something worse than angry. They were certain. "You think?" he said slowly, his voice low and carrying the particular weight of a man who had never once doubted himself. "That you can shame this family and just walk away?" Amara stood completely still. Her bag hung from her hand. Eli came up beside her and instinctively reached for her arm. Victor's eyes cut to his son. "Boy, get back to the house." "Daddy, I said get back." Eli didn't move. He was 17 and shaking, but he didn't move. Victor looked back at Amara. She met his gaze and she hated that her chin was trembling. "You sold me," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she despised herself for it. "You sold me like I was something on a shelf." Victor's expression didn't change. "I provided for this family, like I have always done. By trading your own daughter to a man she doesn't know? That's not providing, Daddy. That's—" "Get in the truck, Amara." She took a step back. He took a step forward. And in that moment, caught between her father's headlights and the dark woods behind her, Amara Bennett understood something that would take her years to fully reckon with. The people who are supposed to protect you can become the very thing you need protection from. She got in the truck. Later, much later, when she was safe and far from Pine Hollow and the memory had softened just enough to be spoken aloud, she would begin her story this way. "I didn't know it then, but that night would destroy my life. And eventually, it would destroy every single person who betrayed me." Pine Hollow, Georgia, was the kind of small town that prided itself on knowing everyone's business. It had one diner, one gas station, 2 churches, and more opinions per square mile than any city Amara had ever visited. She'd grown up there, graduated there, and the moment she was old enough to have a real plan, she'd left. Atlanta was everything Pine Hollow wasn't. It was loud and alive, and no one looked twice at a young black woman with a portfolio under her arm and fire in her eyes. Amara had spent 6 months there, working at a marketing firm, saving money, building something that felt, for the first time in her 23 years, like her own. She'd been good at it, too. Her supervisor had pulled her aside just 2 weeks before she came home to visit and told her there might be a junior position opening up. A real one, with a salary and benefits and a nameplate. She'd come back to Pine Hollow for a week, just to see her family, just to remind herself where she came from. She should have known. She walked through the front door of the house she'd grown up in with a smile on her face, and her mother Grace had hugged her so tightly, and Eli had grinned that gap-toothed grin of his, and for one warm evening it had felt like home. Then Victor sat down at the dinner table with his hands folded and said, "I've made some arrangements." Amara had looked up from her plate. "What kind of arrangements?" "Harrison Cole's boy, Ethan. He's a good man, steady, got land and a name behind him." Victor reached for the salt shaker, calm as anything. "You'll be married before the end of the month." The fork in Amara's hand went still. Grace looked down at her food. Eli, who was sitting across from Amara, went very quiet. "I'm sorry," Amara said, setting down her fork with deliberate care. "I don't think I heard you correctly." "You heard me, Daddy." She forced her voice level. "I have a job in Atlanta. I'm building something. Career. I'm 23 years old. And it's time you stopped running around that city pretending you don't have responsibilities here." "Responsibilities?" She stared at him. "You mean like a husband I've never met? You mean like giving up everything I've worked for? I mean like being a woman with some sense." Victor looked at her across the table like the matter was already settled. "Harrison Cole is one of the most respected men in this county. His family has land that's been in their name for 4 generations. An alliance with them. An alliance." Amara's voice dropped to something very quiet. "Very dangerous. I'm not a treaty, Daddy. I'm your daughter." Victor's eyes hardened. "Then act like it. A daughter honors her family. By marrying a stranger? By doing what needs to be done." Grace set down her own fork then, very softly. "Victor," she said. "Maybe we could." Grace. Just her name. That was all. And Grace went quiet the way she always did. The way she had been going quiet for 25 years. Amara pushed back from the table. "I'm not doing this. You don't have a choice. I have every—" "You have?" Victor said, his voice rising for the first time, filling the small dining room like something that took up all the air. "Exactly as much choice as I give you while you're under my roof. Now sit down." She didn't sit down. She went to her room. And that night, while the house creaked and settled around her, and she could hear her father's television murmuring through the wall, she called the one person she trusted. "Eli," she whispered when he answered. "I need your help." Eli came through. He always did. He'd found out that their father kept a spare key to his truck in the kitchen drawer, and he'd memorized the pattern of Victor's evening: news at 9, asleep by 10:30. They planned it carefully. Amara packed light, just the essentials. Her portfolio, her savings, one change of clothes. They almost made it. They were 30 yards from the truck when the porch light came on and Victor's voice split the night open. "Don't." One word. One word, and Amara's feet stuttered to a stop before her brain could countermand them. 23 years of conditioning, right there in a single syllable. What happened next happened fast. Victor was down the porch steps before Eli could get between them, and there were raised voices, and Amara was shouting that she would not marry a man she didn't know, and Victor was saying things she would carry in her chest for years, things about shame and ingratitude, and somewhere in the middle of it all he grabbed her arm and she twisted away, and that's how the dress tore. Then he locked her in her room. Not with a key. Just with the cold certainty that if she tried to leave again, what happened next would be worse. And Amara, who had grown up inside that certainty, believed him. 3 days later, she met Ethan Cole. He was handsome enough, quiet. He shook her hand at the introduction like she was a business associate, not a woman his family had paid to acquire. Because that was what had happened. Amara found out later from Eli, who had overheard the men talking in the study. Harrison Cole had handed Victor Bennett an envelope. Thick one. A gift, they called it. A token of goodwill. Her father had looked at that envelope and then looked at his daughter and made his choice. The wedding preparations took 3 weeks. Grace moved through them like a ghost. Pressing fabric, arranging flowers, pinning hems, and every time Amara caught her mother's eye there was something in it that looked almost like grief, almost like guilt. But whenever Amara tried to speak to her privately, Grace would find somewhere else to be. Eli was the only one who said plainly what they both knew. "This isn't right," he told her the night before the wedding. They were sitting on the back step the way they used to do as kids, looking out at the field behind the house. "No," Amara agreed. "You could still." "Where would I go, Eli? He'd just bring me back." She leaned her head against her brother's shoulder. "And you'd be the one who paid for it." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "I'm sorry, Amara." "Don't be sorry," she said. "Just remember me when I'm gone." He didn't say anything to that, but he reached over and took her hand, and they sat there in the dark until the mosquitoes drove them inside. The wedding was beautiful. That was the cruelest part of it. The church was full of flowers. White and yellow, Amara's actual favorite colors, which her mother had somehow remembered to order. The sun came through the stained glass in bars of amber and rose. The guests cried in that particular way people cry at weddings, swept up in something they understood to be love. Grace sobbed openly in the front pew. Even Victor looked moved. And Amara walked down that aisle in her white dress. A different one from the torn one, a proper one with buttons down the back. And she smiled the way she'd been taught to smile, the way every girl in Pine Hollow was taught to smile. And she married Ethan Cole on a Saturday in June while something inside her went very, very quiet. The Cole estate was 15 miles outside of town. It was beautiful in the way that things kept for appearances are beautiful, maintained, impressive, cold. A long driveway lined with oak trees. A house with columns and green shutters. Guest rooms that smelled of cedar and old money. And Margaret Cole. Ethan's mother was a small woman with white hair and a posture that suggested she had opinions about everything and had spent 60 years making sure everyone knew it. She greeted Amara on the front steps with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome to the family," she said, in the tone of someone who has not yet decided whether you qualify. In the weeks that followed, Amara learned the shape of her new life. Ethan was polite at breakfast and largely absent by afternoon. He had an office in town where he spent his days, and he returned in the evenings smelling of soap and saying little. He was not unkind, exactly. He simply treated her the way you'd treat a piece of furniture you hadn't chosen yourself, with distant, impersonal courtesy. Margaret was another matter entirely. Nothing Amara did was quite right. The way she folded the napkins at dinner. The way she spoke to the housekeeper. The way she'd started keeping a notebook on the kitchen counter. Sketching out ideas, drafts of things she still couldn't let go of, fragments of the career she'd been building before all of this. "What is that?" Margaret asked one morning, peering at the notebook. "Just notes," Amara said. "Ethan's wife doesn't need to be keeping notes." Margaret picked up the notebook, turned a page, set it down. "Ethan's wife needs to be thinking about this family's future." Amara understood what that meant. Everyone understood what that meant. The pressure began slowly, then all at once. Questions at dinner. Comments from Margaret's friends when they came to visit. Sidelong looks. Pointed silences. The entire household seemed to be waiting for something that Amara had apparently failed to produce. And no one said it plainly, but everyone said it constantly. Months passed. Amara began to notice that Ethan wasn't coming home some nights until very late. At first she told herself it was work. Then she noticed the particular way he'd come in. A little too deliberate, like a man who had spent some time preparing to seem normal. The way he'd shower immediately. The way he never quite met her eyes those mornings. She started paying attention. One Tuesday in November, she followed him. She borrowed the housekeeper's old sedan and drove with her lights off down the back roads she'd been memorizing for months. And she found Ethan's truck parked outside a small house on the edge of the next town over. She sat and watched. She waited. An hour later, Ethan came out of that house with a woman. They stood on the porch and the woman put her hand on the side of his face and he leaned into it. Amara drove home without turning her lights back on for almost 2 miles. She didn't trust her hands. When Ethan came home that night, she was sitting at the kitchen table. He stopped in the doorway. "Where were you?" she asked. "Working late." "I know where you were, Ethan." Something shifted behind his eyes. He set his keys down on the counter. "Amara, I followed you." She kept her voice steady. Cost her something she'd never get back. "I saw her." He didn't apologize. That was the part she hadn't expected. She'd braced herself for excuses, for anger, for tears. What she got was a kind of bored contempt. "Let's not do this," he said. "Let's not do this?" She stood up from the table. "You have been lying to me." "I have been maintaining my life," he said, and his voice was so flat and so certain that she almost couldn't believe she was hearing it. "In the only way that makes sense given what this marriage actually is. You know what this is, Amara. You've always known." She stared at him. "Go to bed," he said. She didn't move. "Go to bed," he said again, and something in his tone. Something clipped and final. made her realize she was in a house where she had no allies and very few exits. She went to bed, and she lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and she thought, something is wrong here. Something is wrong in a way I don't fully understand yet. She found out 3 weeks later. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop. She'd come downstairs for water after midnight, and the voices in Margaret's study were low but not low enough, and the door was not quite closed. She's going to start asking questions. That was Ethan's voice. Then we handle it. Margaret's, clipped and certain. Handle it how? She's not stupid. No, Margaret said. She's not. Which is exactly why we need to move carefully. A pause. Ethan, the situation has not changed. It will not change. What we discussed. I know what we discussed. Then you know we don't have much time. If the truth gets out about you, it won't get out. It could. Margaret's voice dropped. It absolutely could, if she starts pulling threads. Everything we've protected, everything your father built, it all requires an heir, Ethan. The terms of your grandfather's trust require it. And if it comes out that you cannot, stop. If it comes out that you cannot provide that heir, we lose everything. The land, the reputation, all of it. Amara stood completely still in the hallway. She had stopped breathing somewhere in the middle of that sentence and hadn't started again. Ethan cannot provide an heir. She pressed herself against the wall as the pieces rearranged themselves in her mind. The rushed marriage, the pressure for children, the way Margaret watched her with that particular measuring look. They hadn't brought her into this family. They had acquired her as a solution, as cover, as someone to stand in front of a secret that could destroy them. And when she failed to produce the impossible miracle they needed, because how could she, alone? They would need someone to blame. She was back in her room before the voices stopped. She sat on the edge of the bed and put her face in her hands and understood, completely, that she had never been a wife in this house. She had been a scapegoat waiting to be used. She started planning how to leave. She didn't move fast enough. 2 weeks later, she woke up and couldn't remember the night before. Her head was thick and wrong, her mouth dry, her thoughts arriving late and sideways. She'd had dinner with Margaret and Ethan. Something tasted odd in the wine, she thought now she should have, and then nothing. Just blackness and then morning, and the sound of voices outside her door. The door opened. Margaret stood there, and behind her were 2 of her friends from the Women's Guild, and their faces were arranged into expressions of shocked disapproval. And in the chair beside Amara's bed sat a man she had never seen before in her life. The man scrambled up. The women gasped, and Amara's stomach dropped straight through the floor. It spread through Pine Hollow faster than weather. Margaret Cole, tight-lipped and righteous, confirmed to anyone who asked that she had witnessed it herself. Ethan played his part, the wounded husband, the betrayed man, and he played it well. He was quiet and dignified and declined to comment, which in a town like Pine Hollow said everything. The story had all the elements people wanted. A girl from nowhere who'd come up in the world and couldn't behave herself, and a decent family shamed by someone who hadn't earned their name. Amara was thrown out on a Tuesday morning with 1 bag and the clothes on her back. She stood at the end of the cold driveway and watched the house with its green shutters, and she thought, I know what you are. I know exactly what you are. Then she started walking. She went home because she had nowhere else to go, and Victor met her at the door and wouldn't let her pass the threshold. He stood there in his doorway and listened to her, and she could see him deciding, even as she spoke, even as she said the words that should have mattered. I was drugged. Someone was placed in that room. It was staged. She could see him deciding that it was easier to believe the lie, because the lie matched what he already feared about her, because the truth would require him to account for his own part in it. You brought this on yourself, he said. The air went out of Amara's chest. She looked at her father, and for one long moment she felt something settle in her. Not anger, not anymore. Something quieter. A door closing. Then Grace appeared behind Victor's shoulder. Grace, who never said anything. Grace, who had spent 30 years going quiet when her husband filled up the room. Grace, who had cried at a wedding that she must have known was wrong. Victor. Her mother's voice was not loud, but it had an edge to it that Amara had never heard before, and it stopped her father mid-sentence. Not now, Grace. Yes, Grace said. Now. She stepped forward so that she was level with her husband in the doorway. You destroyed your daughter long before anyone else did. And you know it. You have known it since the day you took that man's money. Victor's face went through several things very quickly. Don't, Grace said, and her voice didn't waver. Don't you say a single word to me right now. She turned to Amara. Her eyes were wet. I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry I didn't. Her voice broke. I should have. I know, Mama, Amara said. And she did know. And it hurt. And she let it hurt, briefly, and then she picked up her bag. I can't stay, she said. Grace pressed some money into her hand. Eli appeared from the hallway behind their parents, his face pale and stricken, and Amara hugged him hard enough that he made a small sound. I'll call when I'm somewhere safe, she said into his shoulder. I love you, Eli said. She left Pine Hollow that afternoon. She did not look back. Atlanta did not care what had happened to Amara Bennett in Pine Hollow, Georgia. The city had 10,000 stories happening simultaneously and no particular interest in hers. She rented a room in a boarding house with a shared bathroom and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. She got a job waitressing, then a second job answering phones at a copy center on weekday mornings. She worked 6 days a week for the first year and collapsed into her narrow bed each night too tired to do anything but sleep. But she did not stop. She started keeping her notebook again. She went to the library on Sunday mornings when both jobs were closed and she taught herself things: marketing, business writing, small business accounting. She asked questions of everyone who would talk to her. She observed. She took notes. She rebuilt, piece by piece, the scaffolding of the person she'd been becoming before her father had sold that future for an envelope of cash. She met Noah Carter in the second year. He owned a small restaurant 3 blocks from the copy center, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and a handwritten menu board and genuinely good food. He was always in early, and so was she, and they started nodding hello, and then nodding hello became good morning, and good morning became 10-minute conversations on the sidewalk, and the conversations became the part of her day she looked forward to most. Noah was not like the men she'd known. He didn't issue pronouncements. He didn't fill rooms with his own certainty. When she talked, he listened, actually listened, in the way that meant he remembered what she'd said 3 weeks later and asked how it turned out. He had opinions and he shared them, and then he wanted to know hers. He laughed easily and worked hard and never once made her feel like she was something to be managed. You're remarkable, he told her one evening, after she'd shown him a marketing proposal she'd put together for a potential client, her first freelance project. Don't, she said reflexively. Don't what? Flatter me. He looked at her steadily. I'm not flattering you. I'm telling you the truth. A pause. There's a difference. I think you know that somewhere. She did know it. It just took a while to believe it again. Their friendship became something more gradually and then completely, the way some important things happen. They married on a Saturday in April, outdoors, under string lights. Noah had hung himself in the courtyard behind the restaurant. It was nothing like the wedding in Pine Hollow. It was exactly like what it was. 2 people who had chosen each other. Their daughter was born on a Thursday in the following October, and when Amara held her for the first time she cried in a way she hadn't permitted herself to cry in years, without calculation, without strategy, without fear. Just relief, just love, just the overwhelming evidence that something in her life had finally actually gone right. Grace arrived on a Wednesday morning, unannounced, with a small suitcase and circles under her eyes that told Amara she'd been carrying something heavy for a long time. Amara made coffee. They sat at the kitchen table in the apartment. A real apartment now, 2 bedrooms, plants on the windowsill, and her daughter played on the rug nearby, and for a while neither of them said anything important. Just catching up. Just the gentle circling of 2 people approaching something they both know is there. Then Grace set down her mug. The man they put in your room, she said. He's dead. He confessed first. Amara went very still. He was sick. At the end. Grace folded her hands on the table. He wrote a letter. He named Margaret. He named the person who paid him. He described everything. And the letter got to the county sheriff. And the sheriff, he took it seriously. He had reason to, I think. There'd been rumors about the Cole family for years. Things people suspected but couldn't prove. Grace looked at her daughter. Margaret was arrested 6 weeks ago. Fraud. Conspiracy. Ethan's infertility became public record during the investigation. The whole scheme came out. Harrison lost 2 of the properties to legal fees. Ethan left the county. Amara sat with that for a long moment. She tried to feel triumphant. She waited for it. What came instead was something quieter. Something that felt less like victory and more like the lifting of a weight she'd gotten so used to carrying that she'd forgotten it was there. "There's something else," Grace said. Amara looked up. Her mother's eyes were wet. "Your father has known some of this for years. Not all of it, not the full extent, but enough. He found out about the money Margaret paid and what it was for, and he's been living with it." She pressed her lips together. "He asked if he could see you. He asked me to ask you." The word no was right there, immediate and certain. It was the only sane response. It was what every reasonable version of Amara, the one who'd run through those woods, the one who'd been thrown out of that house with one bag and nowhere to go, the one who'd built a new life from nothing in a city that didn't care about her story. It was what all of them said. But she thought about her daughter on the rug behind her. She thought about the kind of story she wanted her daughter to inherit. "I'll think about it," she told her mother. She went back to Pine Hollow in March, on a day when the dogwoods were blooming along the highway and the light was doing that particular Georgia thing where it softens everything it touches. Noah drove. He didn't ask a lot of questions. Victor met them on the porch. He was older. She'd expected that, and still it landed hard. The way age had settled on him. The way the intimidating architecture of the man she'd feared had diminished. He was still tall. But he looked like a tall man who had been carrying something for a long time and was tired of it. He looked at her and didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "You came." "I came," she said. They sat in the backyard, the same back step where she and Eli used to sit and watch the field. Eli was inside with Noah and Grace, giving them space. Birds were doing something noisy in the tree at the far end of the yard. Victor spoke slowly, like a man picking his way across uncertain ground. "I told myself I was providing for you," he said. "When I took that money, I told myself you'd have a good life. A secure one." He paused. "I don't expect you to believe that made it right. Didn't. I knew it didn't, even then." He looked at his hands. "I knew it, and I did it anyway because I wanted what that money could do for this family, and I dressed it up in language about duty and tradition and a woman's place, and it was a lie I told myself so I wouldn't have to face what I was actually doing." Amara was quiet. "I should have protected you," Victor said. "That was my job. I was your father. And I gave you away to protect my own interests, and then I watched what happened and I told myself you'd brought it on yourself because that was easier than the truth." He stopped. When he looked up, his eyes were red. "I am so sorry, Amara. I know that's not enough. I know there's nothing I can say that. Daddy." She said it quietly, not softly. The pain behind it was real and she didn't pretend otherwise. But quietly, "I know." He looked at her. "I've had a long time to understand why people do what they do," she said. "That doesn't make it right. But I'm not going to carry your guilt anymore. That part is yours." He nodded. He understood that. They sat in silence for a while. Not a comfortable silence. Not yet, but an honest one. Then Victor said, "Can I meet her? Your daughter?" Amara looked at her father for a long moment. She thought about everything it had cost her to be sitting here. Everything she'd survived. Everything she'd built. She thought about Noah in the kitchen, laughing at something Eli said. She thought about her daughter, who would grow up knowing that her mother had never once let anyone convince her she was less than exactly what she was. "Yes," she said, "you can meet her." Back in Atlanta, a week later, Amara sat outside on the small back porch of their apartment while her daughter played in the fading afternoon light. She was running in circles the way toddlers do, laughing at nothing, delighting in the fact of her own movement. Noah came and sat beside Amara, close enough that their shoulders touched. "How are you?" he asked. She thought about it, really thought about it the way she'd learned to do, honestly, without performing either suffering or recovery. "Okay," she said. Actually okay. He nodded. The people who had tried to break her had lost everything they'd fought to protect. Margaret Cole, who had believed she could destroy a woman's reputation and walk away clean, was facing trial. Ethan, who had looked at Amara across a kitchen and told her to go to bed like she was furniture, was gone. His name worth nothing in the county where it had meant everything. Harrison Cole, who had treated his son's infertility as a problem to be covered up at whatever cost, had lost the land that was supposed to be his legacy. And Victor Bennett, who had traded his daughter for an envelope of cash, was living with the particular ruin of a man who got everything he wanted and understood too late what it cost. They had all tried to protect something, and in the trying, in the calculating and scheming and trading of other people's lives, they had destroyed the very things they were trying to keep. Amara had lost a year of her career, a marriage she hadn't wanted, her hometown, and the simple trust of believing that the people who were supposed to love her would. She had lost those things permanently. That was true, and she didn't minimize it. But she had built something they could not have anticipated and could never take away. A business that was hers. A home that was hers. A man who had never once told her what to do or who to be. And this child, this laughing, circle-running, entirely her own person child, who would grow up knowing that she had a mother who had been knocked down and gotten back up and built something real from the wreckage. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming everything they said you never could be. Amara watched her daughter run. The evening light came down golden and warm over everything, and for a long, still moment, she let herself feel it. Not the grief, not the anger, not the years of careful rebuilding, but the thing underneath all of it. Peace. Just peace. Asterisk if this story moved you, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe so you never miss another story like this one. And drop a comment below. Do you think Amara was right to forgive her father? We want to hear your thoughts.